Hey everyone. So we're digging into this really powerful analysis from a financial expert, and what he says is, well, it's pretty mind-blowing. He argues that one single conflict in one part of the world could have absolutely devastating consequences for literally every single one of us. Let's get right into it.
I mean, think about that for a second. How can one regional war threaten to cause global famine and shut down the production of every single electronic device you own? That's the huge question we're unpacking. And trust me, the analysis we're about to go through, it goes way beyond the usual headlines to show this crazy chain reaction that could hit our food, our tech, and yeah, the entire global economy.
Okay, so let's start with the big picture here. You know how it is, whenever a conflict flares up in the Middle East, what's the first thing the news talks about? Oil prices, right? Every time. But according to the expert we're looking at, that's not the real story. Not even close.
He basically says, look, oil is a piece of the puzzle, for sure, but our modern world has this much deeper, way more critical vulnerability that almost nobody's talking about. It's a weakness that's all tied up in these hidden materials that, well, they fuel pretty much everything.
And here's where it gets wild. All of these separate vulnerabilities, we're talking oil, food, technology, the whole shebang, they all funnel down into one single, unbelievably narrow spot on the map. And that spot is the Strait of Hormuz. You've probably heard of it. It's this major strategic choke point in the Persian Gulf. And the key thing to understand is that it's pretty much the only way for all those massive energy and resource producers in the region to get their stuff out to the rest of the world, to get it to us.
So why is this a big deal? Get this. At its narrowest point, the strait is only 21 kilometers wide. Just think about that. That is an incredibly tiny gap for a huge chunk of the world's most vital resources to squeeze through. It makes the whole system, well, extremely vulnerable. So, just how much are we talking about? Well, it's pretty staggering. Through this one choke point, you've got about 20% of the world's oil, another 20% of its liquefied natural gas, 20% of all fertilizer, and a massive 30% of the world's helium, all of it flowing through this one tiny gap. And this is where the expert's analysis gets, honestly, a little scary. Because he draws a straight line from that choke point right to the food on your table and the phone you're probably holding right now. So what happens if somebody blocks it? What if that flow stops? Well, the expert lays out this terrifying domino effect.
Okay, first up, your electronics. Block the strait and you suddenly cut off 30% of the world's helium. Now, helium, you might just think of balloons, right? But it is absolutely critical for making semiconductors. You know, the little chips that are the brains in all of our gadgets. And here's the real problem. There is no substitute for it. None. So a country like South Korea, which makes something like 2/3 of all the world's memory chips, gets 65% of its helium from that region. So you can see where this is going. No helium? No chips. No chips means no iPhones, no new computers, no electronics, period.
But you know, as bad as that sounds for our gadgets, the impact doesn't stop there. According to this analysis, the consequences for our food supply are even worse.
Right. So block the strait, and you also lose 20% of the world's fertilizer. And modern farming is completely 100% dependent on it. In fact, the expert points out that without fertilizer, our planet can only support maybe 1 to 2 billion people. Just let that sink in for a moment. So a 20% loss in fertilizer could easily lead to a 20% loss in global food. And that doesn't just mean higher prices, it means global famine.
And that's not all. On top of the very real threats to our tech and our food, you've got this much bigger economic shockwave just from the energy disruption itself.
Yeah, the expert points to the direct link between energy and the economy. They move in almost perfect sync. You can see how one tracks the other. So if a blocked strait causes even a 5 to 10% drop in the world's energy supply, you can expect a global recession of pretty much the exact same size. It's a one-to-one relationship.
Okay, so we've seen the potential economic nightmare, right? For our phones, our food, everything. But what could actually set all this off? To figure that out, the expert really gets into the geopolitical chess game, and he lays out 5 possible, and let's be honest, pretty alarming ways this whole conflict could end.
Now, to understand his scenarios, you really have to understand how he frames the whole situation. He says, and this is a direct quote from the source we're looking at, "I just think Israel wanted to destroy Iran, they thought they could do it, and they thought they had an American president who would help them do it. And they drastically underestimated how prepared Iran was for that conflict."
So, starting from that perspective, he lays out these 5 potential endgames. Number 1, the total destruction of Iran, which he says would require nuclear weapons. 2,
Iran hits back and destroys the power and water infrastructure of its Gulf neighbors. 3. The so-called Samson Doctrine, this horrifying idea where Israel, if it's about to be defeated, unleashes its own nuclear weapons as a last resort. And then 4 and 5, they both create a whole new nuclear situation. Either Iran tries to take out Israel's nukes, or it decides to build its own.
But here's what's so surprising. The outcome he thinks is the most likely, it's actually number 4. He argues that Iran, being way more prepared than anyone thought, would try to disable Israel's nuclear weapons using its own very advanced but conventional missiles. From his perspective, it's Iran's way of trying to de-escalate, to take the whole nuclear threat off the table.
So, what's the takeaway from all this? What does it mean for the rest of us? Well, no matter which of these scenarios you think is most likely, the expert's analysis points to this one really big and kind of sobering conclusion about the world we live in.
And this is really the bottom line. A single conflict, focused on a tiny 21-kilometer-wide strip of water, can threaten our food supply and all of our technology. What it really shows us is that these incredibly complex global systems that we depend on every single day, they are just so much more fragile than we ever realize.
You know, this whole analysis really forces you to look past the daily headlines and start questioning the stability of these systems we all just take for granted. And it leaves us with one really important question to think about. Is our global system just way more fragile than we've ever been told?